From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
House Republicans are set for a committee vote on impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas as Congress awaits the arrival of a Senate border deal. Plus, the IRS tax return leaker gets 5 years in prison. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. The scene on Tuesday on Capitol Hill is at the House Homeland Security Committee, which is expected to, on a party line vote, poised to charge Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas with refusing to uphold the law. Let's start with some audio diving right in there. This is Congressman Mark Green opening the hearing, explaining what the House investigation has found.
Our intent was to be fair, comprehensive, and meticulous. Unlike House Democrats, we take the use of impeachment extremely seriously. I am proud of the work my Republican colleagues have put in through our 5-phase investigation. We have uncovered a lot. Phase 1 of our investigation documented multiple laws, court orders, and rulings that Secretary Mayorkas disregarded, ignored, or abused, and the dozens of times he has been dishonest with both Congress and the American people.
And here is a reply from Congressman Benny Thompson.
The sham impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas is a baseless political stunt by extreme MAGA Republicans. Chairman Green, Representative Margaret Taylor Greene, and others have pushed for and even fundraised based on this pre-planned, predetermined scapegoating of the Secretary in a process akin to throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Republicans have cooked up vague, unprecedented grounds to impeach Secretary Mayorkas.
Kim, what do you make of this as a response to the chaos at the border? This is an Associated Press story from last Friday when the administration released new numbers. It says arrests for illegal border crossings from Mexico reached an all-time high in December. Since monthly numbers have been released, authorities said exposing a growing vulnerability for President Biden. I take it that Republicans are frustrated with what's happening at the border, and I understand why, but what do you make of this as a response and an attempt to hold the administration accountable?
To go to Benny Thompson's comments, I would agree that while this is unprecedented, the resolution that the House Republicans are marking up and having a hearing about is not in any way vague. So if you read through the language of it, it lists a bill of particulars, as it were, of what's gone on at the border. And it's pretty damning, as you would expect, because the border is a mess. It notes that the border has been overrun by millions of illegal immigrants, many of whom are ushered in and are waiting years for their asylum claims to be heard. That's not counting the 1.8 million that have got across the border and evaded apprehension altogether. So they're just free and loose in the country. Notes that at least 280 that are on terrorist watch lists have been arrested along the way. We've seen hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied children, piles of fentanyl, and that 1,400 people have died trying to make it to the border or make it across. The resolution then moves to their arguments for why this amounts to an impeachable offense. Some of it is a little bit broader. They note that Secretary Mayorkas, in taking his oath, swore to defend and secure our country. They argue that he is not. They say he has an obligation under the Constitution to ensure laws are faithfully executed, and that he is not. And then they have some more specifics. They cite the Secure Fence Act of 2006 that they say requires the Secretary to maintain operational control over the entire international land and maritime borders of the U.S. And they cite the Guarantee Clause, which orders the federal government to protect each of the states against invasion. That's what they've laid out. As it goes, as I noted, it's pretty detailed about what they claim are the offenses and what they claim that he has done to merit impeachment. That's an entirely different question about whether or not this is a good idea. It is unprecedented. We haven't impeached a cabinet secretary in 150 years, and there's a lot of questions about who exactly is responsible here and whether or not these are actually crimes, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, and let me start with the impeachment clause of the Constitution. It says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And Bill, I guess the question here is does executing the President of the United States policy as a cabinet official, even if that policy is bad, even if it's unworkable, does that rise to the kind of high crime that would give force to an impeachment article? Or does this raise questions about whether these two parties in Congress are going to be impeaching each other's executive officials over what amount to policy differences?
Well, that's the danger. If I were a law professor, I'd say, of course, it doesn't rise to high crimes and so forth. But as we've seen with some of the impeachment against Donald Trump, basically the House is the arbiter of all that. You can disagree, but they get to decide a lot of things. I think a lot of this is coming to a head because we have an election year. Mr. Mayorkas is very arrogant in his testimony to Congress. That probably didn't help him. And the Republicans realize the border is a big issue and want to play it. The founders made impeachment very difficult for a reason. I think, as Kim pointed out, even if the House impeached, the Senate is not likely to convict. But clearly, the Republicans, they're hoping that this would help make it a political issue. I think, as Kim said, it's kind of the equivalent of a vote of no confidence. I'm not sure that would make a difference to most voters. I think there's a lot of things going on. I think people know that Biden's immigration policy has been a disaster. Whether you impeach or remove one of his cabinet officers for that, I think is a iffier question.
But removal seems politically out of the question, Kim, because we have a Democratic Senate, remember. Those impeachments, when they're passed by the House, go over to the Senate to be tried. And so that's the other part of this I find a little bit puzzling. Republicans are moving toward an impeachment that they probably know they're not going to get a conviction on. And so why would that be their focus rather than highlighting the policies that need to be changed, the laws that need to be changed, and then working as members of Congress to say, this is what's wrong with our asylum standard, and we have a bill to fix it, and let's get together and pass that bill. And if you can't get Democrats on board for that, if you can't get the president's signature on it, then you can make an argument that those Democrats are the ones who are blocking the changes needed to get the border under control.
This is indeed a messaging exercise. I mean, this has no shot in the Senate. As Bill notes, it's going to be the equivalent if they go ahead with it, with a no confidence vote, essentially. They may think that in doing this, that they are, in fact, highlighting what you say, Kyle, that they are trying to get attention for failures at the border. I agree with you that it would be far more consequential and productive for them to be doing this in a way that creates their own legislation and offers a solution to the problem. And look, the reality is that the reason they're not doing it is because they're chicken. Nobody really wants to touch the immigration football because it's complicated. Congress hasn't done it in decades. It's much easier to just say, look, the other side is failing. And look, when Donald Trump was president, he did it all better. Here's my biggest issue with this is just being a law and order constitutionalist myself, and also someone who doesn't like the word unprecedented anymore because it seems to happen all the time and it usually leads to no good. But as a constitutionalist, if you're going to talk about high crimes and misdemeanors, you need to be able to claim that Mayorkas and Biden are currently engaging in practices that have been ruled illegal by a court. And sadly, they have not, okay? No court has said that the current parole operations and policies that Biden is doing are illegal. Ditto his asylum policies. The court, in fact, back in 2022, allowed the administration to end Remain in Mexico. Just last year, it ruled 8-1 that the states don't necessarily have the standing to challenge the federal government's priorities in terms of how it ministers the border. And so I don't like what's happening at the border. But what all that adds up to is that Congress has written enough laws in the past that are so vague or so now out of touch with our current situation that it's allowing presidents like Biden to run Mack trucks through the exceptions and the holes. And that isn't necessarily going to change until, as you say, Kyle, Congress steps up to the plate and changes the laws. So you can complain all you want about Mayorkas and say he's not following the rules based on our interpretation of the rules. And the House can do exactly what it wants. Like Bill says, it gets to set the standards. That's fine. But let's just be clear that that this is not a high crime and misdemeanor standard that has necessarily been blessed by any court or judicial arm in the land.